You're listening to Clifford Kelly on Straight Truth Radio, the podcast.
Grace and peace be unto you from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. This is the Straight Truth Radio podcast, the place where the lip of truth endures forever. I am your host, Cliff Kelly. Thanks for being here and tuning us in. Here where we are just bringing understanding to end time events. Just before we get started, I wanted to make sure that you know how you can get in contact with us. You can email us at straighttruthradio@yahoo.com and straighttruthradio@yahoo.com. Also, the video platforms that we are presenting the podcast on is Facebook. You're watching the actual homepage now, Facebook, Cliff Kelly, and also the Straight Truth Radio page. We are also, you can check us out on Twitter at Straight Truth, the letter R and the number 1, at Straight Truth R1, or at CK Holyman. You can also find us on Periscope, and we are also trying to stretch our borders. You can see us on YouTube also. For those of you who are you can watch, you're watching the replay, but for those of you who rather you like the audio format also, we are on the audio format. You can check us out on Podbean, Anchor, Apple Podcasts, and SoundCloud. That's Podbean, Anchor, Apple Podcasts, and SoundCloud. So we want to thank you again for tuning in to the this episode here, where we were introducing this week and our guests. And when I bring them in, we will we're gonna chop it up. But we decided that there's so much so much to talk about, so much material here, that it's going to be a two-parter. So today we're introducing the first part of what we're calling race, justice, and kingdom living with my guest, Jason Carter. And so without further ado, we want to bring Jason in. Jason L. Carter, Esquire, the attorney, my friend and family. Brother Jason, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic, and thank you so much for having me. It's my honor to be here.
Okay. And you're also, not only do you work professionally as an attorney at law, but you are also a minister.
Yeah, I think that's a tough title today, just in what that bears. Like, I am not directly affiliated with any ministerial body and by that and hold that title for anybody. But I do believe the Bible calls all of us to minister, right? As a believer, we're called to spread the gospel. And so in that respect of a minister, then yes, I was a licensed minister in Texas many years ago, and have taken what opportunities are presented to me to work in that capacity. But yes, my 9 to 5, if you will, is I work as an attorney, and I'm grateful for those opportunities.
And so you got your hands full, right?
Yeah, God is gracious enough to put a lot in my hands, and I try to, you know, the good word tells us to whom much is given, much is required. So I try to do what's required with what's given.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
Look, so just before we've been talking about many things here, and so just before we kind of take off and get into it, there's something I wanted to maybe to kind of start us off. There's something I wanted to play here, and I want to see if it's gonna screw up on me. I think it already timed out on me. So let me do this again. Okay, so as you already know, as we all know right now, um, our president, um, President Trump, has contracted the coronavirus. So there's all kinds of talk about, what has happened, how did it happen, is it real, is it fake, whatever. But as the saint, as the believer, uh, what is our position? And so I heard this conversation on Friday, and so I want to kind of play it back, and then we'll kind of start here and just get right into our conversation. Now,
Sounds good.
what you're about to hear, is Dietrich Hatton, the musical artist, also a pastor, and I'm not sure what city. I think he's in California now, but he started out in Detroit and he's been all over. But anyway, so him and his wife, Dominique, I believe her name is. We're talking about President Trump and the coronavirus and what is the saint's position on what has happened. So I'm going to play that. Now, let's first say that this clip is about 20 minutes long. Obviously, I'm not playing all of that. I'm just going to play about a minute and a half, but I just want to set the tone for where we're going to go since this is one of the newest things that have happened. All right? So here we go.
Come in quick, having a quick conversation about your president, Donald Trump, and him contracting the COVID-19. And the question is, what should be our position as a church? I'm talking First Lady. She has a strong position about it. She feels some type of way, and I feel some type of way also. And I think that y'all coming in? Y'all here with us? Y'all here with us? Good they are. It is our responsibility to pray. And if you cannot pray, that may speak to what's in your heart. It may speak to the evil that's in your heart. You don't all the way agree with that. You don't necessarily agree with that, but I just think that.
I mean, for me, I want to say I don't agree to pray. I just feel like when we say pray, we have to, like when the Bible tells you to pray for your enemies, it's very specific to let you know it's your enemy. And I think
that's good.
I think we try to remove the part where it says your enemy. And when we're blanketing,
I think our prayers don't exonerate Trump from the evil that he's done.
Right. No, I'm just saying, but when we have these outward expressions on social media, we tell people, pray for the president. You should say, pray for him in spite of his evil ways, because we're taking away a part of what he's doing that's causing people to be angry at him or towards him. So I think we have to be more specific when we tell people when to pray, because it'll make it make more sense. Just simply saying pray for him because X, Y, or just pray for him because that's what you're supposed to do. No, I'm supposed to pray for my enemy, because to me, he's an enemy. He's not. I'm being honest. He's an enemy. I don't care if he's the president. He's still an enemy.
He's been an enemy to the people, to a group of people.
If you love God, how can you not love his people? No matter what color they come in, no matter
how good or bad.
None of that. You know what I'm saying? You just say, okay, it's God's people. I have to choose to love them. I want to do what's best by them. I'm not going to hide this pandemic from them. I'm not going to do anything to divide this nation. I'm not going to do anything.
So what you're saying is pray for Trump, but don't act like he hasn't done evil. And he has played down the COVID-19.
Yes.
Don't act like he ain't maybe the cause for 200,000 plus people
right.
in America to have died as a result of the same thing that he's contracted.
Okay, so let me stop it there, because I can go on and on with that, but again, that clip is 20 minutes long. So Jason, let me ask, what's your take on that? How did you feel about that?
Well, I'll start by saying I may miss some of the questions. I think we're just having a touch of a delay and or interference. So if I don't answer something, don't think I'm ignoring you.
Okay.
But I think that there are some tough issues that they're wrestling with. I'm glad that they resolved, if nothing else, on what the Bible says, because I think the Bible holds us accountable despite our flesh. And I think that there are many people in their flesh who are struggling with doing something that they think is positive for somebody that they believe has been so negative. But I think the Bible makes it clear that that's our calling as Christians, that it's more about our humanity than it is how we kind of behave as humans. And so
You're
I
breaking
like
up there, Jason.
Oh, am I? Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Okay.
Perfect. I would just say I think it's about our humanity, and I like that they're wrestling with it. I think that as Christians, we often will hold people to and expect ourselves to approach the world with some measure of perfection. But I think that what makes us human is that we're asking the questions. I think Jesus, when he walked with the disciples, always was asking questions in order to figure out what was in their heart. And the fact that they're open enough that they're in a position right now to at least be asking the question. They're taking some stances, right? Your president, they're saying some arguably inflammatory things. But I don't put that above the fact that they're willing to engage in a conversation that is very controversial. I think there's a possibility for them to lose people who follow them, because there are likely people who follow them that say, I have no kind word for him, and there's nothing kind I can say about Trump, and I will not support anybody who is willing to say anything positive or pray for Trump. And so to put themselves on the line like that, and I think is admirable. And again, while they may or may not approach it the way that I would, I'm glad they're having the conversation.
Okay. So now, when I heard that, at first, I think I also took the same position. Okay, at least I'm glad that they can be honest about their position. Okay. However, I also, my feelings also took a turn. Now I don't know if I'm having a tough time dividing the fact that my feelings take a turn, because it's no secret that I have supported this administration for whatever my reasons are. It's a whole quandary of feelings about how could you, versus the fact that I also am a minister and I'm looking at what the Bible says. See, there's something key here that drew me in, that I heard Lady Dominique say. She said, when we're praying, we should pray, help him in spite of his evil way. Because it makes more sense. But it makes more sense to who? It makes more sense to you, the individual, or it makes sense to God? Do we really think that God needs us to specify the evilness of someone else's heart when he knows all things and all people? That part doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. Our responsibility as saints, as kingdom men and women, if we call ourselves ambassadors of Christ, is now. What is an ambassador? An ambassador is a person who represents a kingdom, correct? And so that representative doesn't walk into whatever field they're supposed to go in representing their own angst and their own feelings. They represent the government that has sent them. So it doesn't matter how I know we want to put our feelings in it. We want to put our feelings in it. We all This is America. It's a democracy. I have a right to my opinion. I have a right for this. I had a right for that. But if you are a kingdom citizen, and I keep saying this all the time, if you are truly a kingdom citizen, if you're supposed to be salt and light, if we're ambassadors of Christ, my feelings have no place in any of this. And I think we confuse our ocracy, democracy versus theocracy, the government where God rules. How do you feel about that?
I would say that what I felt like she was saying was, I'm willing to acknowledge that I'm praying for him, but I'm not willing to do so without acknowledging that I disagree with what he does. I don't see that as terribly different than, say, John the Baptist, who I'm sure was praying for the ruler at the time, but was very vocal about the things that the ruler was doing at the time. I don't think that she invalidates her walk or her theocracy by saying, I have to follow God and pray for this guy, but I need the people around me to know that I have some aspects of his walk that I disagree with. So I don't feel like that compromises her walk in any way, because while we have, and the Bible makes it clear that God appoints leaders, they are not beyond critique. And so I see that as just her critique.
Okay. All right. Okay. Fair enough. So what are the things we're actually critiquing in this day and age? Obviously, we're talking about this subject is race, justice, and kingdom living. And so what are some of the things that we are critiquing? What you say?
I think there's a lot. I think, as you said, you've probably heard it all. But we have a president who started his presidency off, and many would say, by trying to vilify an entire group of people, that being the Mexicans and other Latin Americans who were crossing the border, beginning to associate them with criminals who happened to be of the same descent who were living here in America. And people didn't like the generalities in which he was approaching them. He did very similar things about Muslims, saying things like, if I think there was a killing that occurred in California, and he was quoted as saying, if he were president, he would immediately bar the entry of all Muslims into the United States for the actions of a small few. And so, and then he talks about building the wall. Then on top of that, he was not afraid, at least many would believe, during his campaign, to benefit from the support of white supremacy and the support of people that were traditionally seen as bigots. And so there's a sense that this is not a president for all people. And so I think that those are things that people get really excited about. I mean, we could go into the economic conversation as well, and that there are definitely those who believe that on top of all of that, he's not a president who's about bringing economic benefit to all people. And there are a number of economic theories that they believe, or many would believe, he relies upon in error. And so I guess the last thing I would say is there are definitely a lot of people who believed that he was the anti-Obama. And you have a lot of people who supported Obama, right? He was a two-term president who received a lot of support. And so because of that, and because he was viewed in many circles as an Obama backlash, I think that those things have incensed people over the course of, definitely in the beginning of his campaign, over the course of his campaign. He's done several things over the course of his campaign that I for one, have found reprehensible. And so, I think those are the things that get people excited.
Okay. All right. So, and to our viewing and listening audience, over the 4 years, we've had these kind of conversations a lot. As I said in the beginning, we're family. So whenever and you know what I mean when I say this, so whenever the sisters had an event or they got together, then the rest of the family got together. And while the ladies were in one room, we were in the back in the other room talking about these kind of things here. So basically, you're kind of hearing a replay of a whole bunch of conversations that we have had. However, Corona has interrupted a lot of stuff that we probably would have had on the table. We would have been discussing. But so one of the things you said here is you talk about how he benefited from white supremacy. And I have to disagree with that because, and the reason why I say that is because when he has been asked several times. I mean, if we honestly go back and you find all the tape on how many times he's been asked about this, it has to be at least 20 times or more where he has denounced David Duke, where he has denounced the KKK, where he has denounced white supremacy itself. So to say that he continues to benefit from it when you have a person like Joe Biden, who he's running against, okay, who has endorsed Biden, he's endorsed him. Now keep in mind, Biden, in fairness, Biden in August did denounce the endorsement, but even since then, this guy Richard Spencer continues to endorse him, and no one asked Biden about any of this. But you'll keep on asking Trump about something he has already denounced 20 plus times because you just have to have it said and made that Trump is a racist. Now, I find it odd. I find it odd that he wasn't a racist before he ran for president, but all of a sudden, when he decided to run, now he's a racist. I find that very, very odd. Where does all that come from?
I think it's self-generated. So my focus in terms of Trump was, at least my initial response was about his campaign. And I think that racism exists in how we view other people, either as inferior or as subordinate to us. And I think his characterization of the Latin community embodies a racist view of people. I think as believers, I think we have to be challenged because as believers, not only are we called specifically to the world, right, to share what we have with the world, we're more specifically called to also share what we have directly with people who are believers. And the vast majority of Latin Americans are believers. And yet we are supporting a president who would close the borders to them and who would make it that much harder for them to get entry into the United States without a plan. You have people coming to the border who are seeking asylum, who have been separated from their kids. I think there's a recent article about the fact that not only were they being separated from their kids, but they're now forcing hysterectomies on women. I mean, the list of devastating things that have happened at the border go on. And so when you have someone treating a people group that way, it's hard to say that he is not racist. It's hard to say that that he's not racist when he makes grandiose statements about banning all Muslims. That is attributing the acts of the few to the many. That by definition is racism.
He didn't call all Latin people criminals or whatever. He was talking about a certain criminal group who happens to be Hispanic. What is it, M13 or whatever they call it, whatever that group is. And then you got the coyotes who pay family members to take their children across the border, playing like they're their kids, until we started to actually test the children and the adult, bringing the child over, finding out that there was no connection, no relationship with the child and the adult at all. So
yeah, I would say the vast majority of people coming to the border, at least from every stat that I've seen, they were related to the child they were bringing, and they were separated, and some are still separated from their children. And I think it's the generalities. It's the same argument that Trump just made against Biden. Trump makes the argument against Biden and his crime bill, and uses Biden's language in his crime bill to attribute it to what Biden felt about all blacks at the time. He said you use the generality in how you communicate it, and that should be attributed to everybody who was impacted by what you said. Well, the same thing's happening as he's merging these conversations of what is statistically remote in terms of crime in the United States. There's far more crime happening by whites and blacks in the United States than there are by Hispanics by far. But he uses that as a platform to then justify spending money on a wall, when at the time, and even still today, more people overstay their visas than come across the border. To indicate that our immigration problem in America is caused by not having tight enough restrictions at the border is just statistically incorrect. And so he uses these things to his benefit. To your question about white supremacy, the denunciations of white supremacy, specifically after the incident in Charlottesville, there's a couple problems with that denunciation. One of which is he has a very active Twitter profile. He's not afraid to talk about the things that matter to him. But 2 days after the incident in Charlottesville, he comes out and condemns white supremacy. I find that to be a half measure. And I find this to be a president full of half measures. He has yet to unequivocally come out and denounce, if we want to talk about recent history, the Proud Boys. Immediately when he told them to stand back and stand by, immediately when he said that, social media went crazy with the Proud Boys. I have seen post after post. I've seen Proud Boys saying there's going to be a war in November no matter what. No matter who wins, we're going to war. I would want a president who looks at a group like that, who makes their case on supremacy and racism, and say today on Twitter, I denounce the actions of the Proud Boys. I denounce what they stand for. I denounce the idea that they think that they're going to violently maintain their supremacy in America. That's what I would want to see from him. And until I see that from him, I have issues with this presidency. So, and we could go on and on. We could go on and on to talk about what he said about George Floyd versus what he said about the young man who shot 2 people, 3 people, the 17-year-old kid who ended up shooting 3 people, versus his comments on George Floyd, versus how quickly he came to the defense of the Covington boys. What I see in him is a track record of speaking very boldly for the things that he supports and speaking very quietly for the things that he does not. And that to me tells me a lot of what I need to know about him.
Okay. So now, but on the flip side, then if you have a problem with that, then I have a hard problem not seeing how we don't have the same problem with Joe Biden, who has a long track record. I mean, in 1975 alone, I mean, this is not hard to find. If someone is really looking and if they really truly want to do their research on both sides of these candidates, okay, it was not hard to find this quote. 1975, out of the Philadelphia Inquirer. He says, I think the Democratic Party could stand a literal George Wallace. Now, who is George Wallace? George Wallace was a segregationist in Alabama. But he says here, I think the Democratic Party could stand a literal George Wallace. Someone who is not afraid to stand up and offend people. Someone who would not pander, but will stand for what American people know in their gut is right. This is what Joe Biden is saying. Not only that, I got so many quotes here. Let me pull this one out. So in 77, I'm going to save some of this stuff, but in 77, he writes a letter to James Eastland. James Eastland, another segregationist. And I think he was in either Mississippi or Georgia. He says, this is a letter he writes to George Eastland. And he says, I want you to know that I very much appreciate your help in this week's committee meeting in the attempt to bring my anti-busing legislation to a vote. There's several letters that go back and forth between him and Eastland, going all the way back to '72. Now we already know the obvious quotes where he says, where's the one I was looking for? The one where he talks about the racial jungle, but how he doesn't want his kids to grow up in a racial jungle. I mean, really, Joe? How is it that we ignore that? We're talking about a track history of this man, his conduct, his character. In fact, speaking of character, he talks about another guy named a senator back in the 70s, but this was in '88. On the Senate floor, he praises the segregationist John Stannis, where he says he was a man of character. And John Stannis and other senators wrote when they opposed. Now, John Stannis, he opposed the Brown versus Board of Education. You understand that case, but then he also they wrote what was called the Southern Manifesto, and he then bragged about being gifted with the table that manifesto was written on. So, I mean, what do you say about that?
So I would first say that you suggested that my job here is to defend Joe Biden, and I would say that's not my job, right? You've asked questions about Donald Trump and his policies and why I think that Donald Trump is a racist, and I've answered that. I think everyone suffers from a measure of racism. I think racism is so woven into our society that it's something we have to be anti. That each of us, black, white, or indifferent, have to be anti-racist. I think it's no different than if we see a white guy walking down the street with his shirt off, we don't think twice about it. But if we see a black kid walking down the street with his shirt off, we start thinking about our neighborhood. We start wondering why the kid is walking down the street with his shirt off. Black, white, or indifferent, the color of someone's skin causes us to make immediate judgments about them. And those judgments are woven into our society. So does Joe Biden suffer from the same racist ideas that Trump suffers from? Yeah. I mean, the Clinton crime bill was written by Joe Biden. And the crime bill was to stop the issues that were happening in the urban core, but not addressing the core issues of the urban core. And we can get into that much later. But no, I don't exonerate him for his actions. If I'm looking at the two individuals today, I see two people. I see one individual who I think has a likelihood of dealing with the things that I really think are facing our society today. For me, the biggest issue facing our society is economic inequality and the fact that we have created ghettos intentionally as a society in America, and then we choose to ignore what happens when you force people into crowded areas with bad education and with low income and no jobs. So to me, the person who is most suited to address those issues and not to continue, as we've seen over the last 4 years, continue to expand the wealth gap and to ensure that the wealthiest people in America continue to enrich themselves is Joe Biden. It doesn't mean Joe Biden doesn't suffer from racist ideas. Do I think that Joe Biden has had conversations? Do I think that he's willing to acknowledge his racism and be redemptive about it? Yeah, he's spoken out about how the crime bill to him wasn't a good idea, and we've seen the negative effects of it. And neither party has done, in my mind, a great job of attacking it. I think that Obama did a pretty good job, but not a great job in how he reduced the disparity between crack and cocaine, took it from a 1 to 100 penalty ratio to 1 to 18. I think that Trump did his first step. I think it's interesting that he had 3 stronger bills on the table, but he went with the first step. Both of them freed roughly about 3,000 people. When we know that there are millions of incarcerated people, neither of those steps by either party, to me, really address the issue of the overpopulation of our prison systems and the fact that we over incarcerate and the fact that we currently over incarcerate the majority of our offenders for nonviolent crimes. We're creating criminals by putting them in an institution where they're just interacting with other criminals. So, but who do I think has the better chance at addressing those things? For me, it would be Joe Biden. But again, I do not exonerate him for his past. I would just say, lastly, there's a great book that I've looked at called We Lock Up Our Own. And it's an analysis of DC, Washington, DC, and the incarceration rates of a Black controlled government. And at the time of the drafting and passage of the crime bill, we were incarcerating people as Blacks in DC at the same rate that we were that it was happening in majority communities. There was a sense nationally that the way to fix the problem with the urban core was more policing. And I think that has been debunked to date. The person who is trying to propose more law and order and more police control right now is Donald Trump. I don't support that. The person who's at least willing to acknowledge that there's another way to approach this other than just paying people to continue to militarize our communities is Joe Biden. I support that. I hope he does it, but they're both politicians. No one knows what they're going to do until they get in office and start doing stuff.
Well, okay. One last point on race, and then we're going to move on. But and where I want to go is, you had mentioned when we talked privately that you were invited to speak at a church, and yeah. So tell us a little about that, and and then we'll move on.
Absolutely. So after the murder of George Floyd, those who were in predominantly, I would say in every church really, but those who definitely were in predominantly white churches, many of those churches took up the call of trying to address the issue of race. And I think that there are definitely churches that didn't really have the words. And I think that that's just an important thing to say, is that a lot of people want to talk about race and they want to talk about diversity. They just don't have the language. And it's hard to have the language to address it in a way that can be digestible for people. So I had recently read two books that I recommend everyone read. They're by a guy named Ibram X. Kendi. The first book is Stamped from the Beginning, and the second book is How to Be Anti-Racist. And so it was just, to me, the providence of God that while reading those books, I had to come to terms with my own racism and how I view people within my community and even outside of my community in a way that didn't honor God. At the same time, I had a colleague, a former pastor at the church I attend now, who had a predominantly white church in Mansfield, Ohio, a predominantly white community, and wanted to figure out how to dive into this conversation. He had been preaching about race and equality for about 3 weeks, but again, just lacked the language, and wanted his congregation to take a larger step forward, to hear from a Black man about his experience, but also hear from him about to speak from his own brokenness. And so I took that opportunity and preached a message there. I would just give a small highlight. I don't want to take too much time, but I would say that I think the core of my message, if I had to synthesize it, was label Christian is not enough to overcome racism, because the early church, they walk with Christ. They knew Christ, yet they couldn't deal with the concept of communing with Gentiles because their traditions kept them away from it. And in fact, the social environments they found themselves in kept them away from doing the work of God. And it came down to a time in Galatians where Paul held Peter accountable, which is very interesting to me. But Paul held Peter accountable to his racism, to the fact that he would not associate with Gentiles.
Among the Jews.
Yeah.
He started fighting in that little community.
Yeah, and it's important because, to me, and I just say this last point, it's not just about whether you acknowledge somebody's humanity, but the call of the Christian is to give. And so if you're not associating with someone, you'll never know their needs, you'll never be able to identify their hurts and their wants, and you'll never be able to be in a position to give. And that's a much larger conversation, but I think that's a huge issue that the modern church struggles with. And something that we're going to have to come to grips with. So that was the crux of the message.
Okay, so we'll see. Now you kind of. So then, what do you think is a solution, or what do you see as a solution? What do you what do you project as at least the next step of at least the honest step of resolving some of the issues or addressing this racism, and I mean among saints?
Yeah.
Because number one, it's hard to, you're not going to get the unsaved to the heathen, the pagan, to admit to their own racism and then, make them, Peter talks about being born again, not of corruptible seed, but of incorruptible seed. And the unsaved is always trying to better themselves without changing themselves. Mm-hmm. But those of us who have been changed because of Christ, and we still walk in those, well, we still have a racial problem. I mean, what do you say to your fellow brother and sister? We're busy talking about white privilege, but we are also operating out of our own vein of racism. What do you say about that? How do we fix? Where do we go?
I say that it's an acknowledgement. I actually find it interesting that I find it easier to convince the unchurched of their racism than the churched, because the barrier to most people in the church is believing that because of salvation they can't, right? It's that idea. Because I'm saved, I can't be racist. Because I'm saved, I can't hate. And so getting them to move beyond that I have found to be very difficult. I try to remind people that the founding fathers of our country were all professed Christians who all believed that blacks were no better than apes, believed that they were an inferior form of humanity, wouldn't baptize them for fear that they would become Christian. And so they began to change laws so that they could somehow satisfy their morality by converting blacks at the time. But when they converted them, their belief was that their body could not be saved, but they could possibly save the spirit. These are Christians. These are people who are attending church services every day. So the notion that our Christianity or our professed Christianity is enough to get us to overcome racism is, I think, a false narrative. I think as a church, we begin with the fact that we're mirroring exactly what the Jewish nation looked like when Jesus came. We are mirroring a nation that is entrenched in tradition, that refuses to acknowledge its own hypocrisy, and that doesn't see that our wealth and our prosperity is getting in the way of our work. I think right now the modern church believes that if I'm doing well, if my family's eating well, if I'm surviving well, that I'm somehow satisfying God's commission. And that the only people who aren't satisfying God's commission are the poor or the people who don't have what I have. I think we have these false concepts in our society, like pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I don't think you can find that in the Bible. I think what you find in the Bible is when you look at Matthew 5, Jesus says, to everyone who begs from you, give. And so I think that we have come to a point where our wealth, where we're like in many cases, I think it's the rich young ruler, where he comes around and he says, Jesus, I have done everything that the tradition calls for me to do. I've done it all. And Jesus says, but unless you're willing to give up that wealth to follow me, then you've missed it. And so I think getting people to realize that their wealth and their entitlement is getting in the way of the mission. I think that's the first step. And I think that's yes, in helping white people identify that there's a privilege to being white in America. This isn't it's not a false narrative to say that there's more wealth, that the wealth in America is still controlled by white people predominantly, that if there was full equality in America, we have 200 senators, but only 3 of them are black, right? We can see the inequity throughout our society. And so that's not something to ignore. I think we can, if we take a step back and just see that the ghettos that we somehow all want to flee from and we hate were created by legislation. They were the government. This wasn't like a free market concept where black people decided to live together in poverty. This was a creation of the state to keep black people oppressed in a finite area while they expanded the suburbs and the rural community for whites. You don't have to work hard to find these facts. And so I think acknowledging that, I think it's also true to acknowledge that within our own community, we have biases that control the way we interact with each other in our own community. We have colorism, and we have to acknowledge that. We have to acknowledge that who we choose to be our idols, our celebrities, may not be, just because they're successful, may not be the best people to point our children towards. And so there's that. I think, but I also think that we have to quit telling ourselves false truths. All right, I think that we have to quit telling ourselves that that somehow Black fathers just don't want to be around their kids. Right, that somehow we have this pathology of fatherlessness in the Black community, that its source is only in our Black skin. And we have to understand that there are greater factors that are impacting that were intentional, in many cases are intentional, that are impacting the Black community, that we have to acknowledge, and we have to continue to unite to try to overcome. I'll say just lastly, the system, the market created the vacuum, or not the vacuum, it created the conditions by which white people could develop and multiply wealth in America. This was created by the government. This wasn't a surprise.
Say that again. Say it again. Say that again.
I said the system, our government created the system by which white people could develop and multiply wealth in America.
Okay.
It wasn't accidental, right? You can date it back to slavery.
Okay,
right?
So now you're talking about the system, and I would agree with you totally. But are you talking about a democratic system or a Republican system? Because when I see what you're saying, it is the system. I don't care whether it's a D or R. It doesn't matter who sits at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. It was the same system, no matter what party it represented. So then, help me understand why are we so devoted to one party?
Oh, that's easy. That's easy. So the Republicans, because the Republicans lost their devotion to us. As the Republicans in the 1900s,
the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party lost its devotion to us.
But we can just talk about I can tell you.
LBJ's statement alone, and you know, I don't want to be too discolorful, but he says we locked up the bomb vote for the next 200 years. Does that sound like a love for the people, or I'm gonna use these people to get what I need?
Oh, so I think I love that. So I think I love the Candace Owenses and the Larry Elders and all of them reading from the Thomas Sowell Bible, who say that there's this democratic plantation, right? Mm-hmm. I love that, because all of us are on a plantation. We're either on the Republican plantation or we're on the Democratic plantation, and you see that in how they synthesize our votes to single issues. Whatever the most important issue is of the time, that's what they're going to say is the issue that they're going to focus on to get our vote, so that they can continue to further their interests. That's not party dependent. Both parties do that. But the reason why so many Black people support Democrats is that the Republicans, when finding themselves unable to convince Southern Republicans to vote for them for the presidency, they began in the early 1900s to drop issues that mattered to Black people. They turned their backs on Blacks. And so because of that, as we go into the 1930s and 1940s and the civil rights era picks up, you have Democrats who are advocating for the expansion of rights in the Black community. Well, that's my mother, and that's your mother. And those are their parents who the only people that are saying things that are trying to benefit the Black community are D's. The R's are saying, right? It wasn't a Democrat who were out spraying Black people and sicking dogs on them. These were Republicans, and these were Southerners. And so it makes sense to me that Black people aligned themselves with the party that basically they aligned themselves with the party that was going to see their interests through to the best of their ability. as blacks in America, no one has fully supported our interests. If that was the case, then we would have funding in the urban core. We don't have to have ghettos in America. It's crazy. Both parties have had a shot at
Right,
fixing it,
right,
right?
right.
Neither
Thank you.
party has
Right,
fixed it. But
right.
the only party, probably over the past 60 years, that has paid any attention to the issues that are happening in that urban core has been the Democrats. The Republicans stand back and say, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And I love to respond to that with, some people don't have boots and some people don't have straps. So sometimes you got to help them get a boot and a strap for them to pull themselves up. Or I love the economic concept of a rising tide raises all sails. That's great, right? But the problem is not everybody has a boat or a sail. So maybe if we give them a boat and a sail, then the rising tide will work for them. And we can do
Okay,
that in America.
okay, but now, did the D's have the D's actually helped us? Because and the reason why I say that is because as long as, okay, you know that, okay, Maya and I, we have 3 children, right? Okay. Now, as long as we're married, the government is not helping us. But let Maya go downtown with those 3 kids and cry being single, she had all the help that she wants. As long as she's married to the government is going to help her. But as soon as they find out that Cliff or some other dude is involved, there goes all the help. And to keep in mind, that wasn't a Republican thing. That was a Democratic system to keep the family separated. So how are they really, or how did they really help us?
I love that. So interestingly enough, right, I think we have the same conversation in that you have this problem, right? I think with Republicans, the answer to that would be, then let's just get rid of social welfare programs. Let's get rid of entitlement programs, because that's disincentivizing people from actually working to be better, to be a part of the American system. Where you then have the Democrats who are saying, we're going to help people, but if both parties are in the home, we're not going to help them. My question is, which one has been more beneficial to the Black community? The fact that there's at least help out there, or the people trying to strip all the help away? I think what's been more beneficial to us is that there's at least help out there. Case in point, my life. My mother had 5 kids. She was by herself. When she was by herself, we were able to get on welfare. And so we were able to get on welfare to make it through. We lived in welfare housing, but we worked to get off of it. There was a time in my adult life when I was in college that I was again on welfare. But I think that most times when we think about it, we focus on TANF, which is food stamps and things of that nature. We don't think about the other welfare programs that exist in the United States. One I love to remind people of is public school or college, right? You don't have, married or single, if your kid goes to a state school, they're going to benefit from government subsidies, right? But we don't think about that. Married or single, if you pour some money into the Social Security, when you retire, you're going to get a piece of the Social Security. That's welfare for older people. So that welfare is happening for lots of people. The interesting thing that I don't love is that the Republicans have vilified, right? They've chosen to try to create this image of a welfare mother, this mother who doesn't want to work and who is just having multiple kids in order to stay on the system. That is an extreme minority of the individuals who are using public assistance as a bridge to get to the next stage in their life. More so because we don't have a living wage in America. The majority of the people who are working and on welfare are the working poor. You can't survive on an $8.50-hour job, not and want to live somewhere where your kids might have a modicum of safety. You can't do it. So you have to get welfare to supplement your ability to live in America. I find it interesting that at the same time, you can have Republicans say that unemployment is at 4%. But out of their same mouth, they'll say there's so many unemployed people just using the system. The two can't be true. Because one says 96% of people are working. 96% of people are working. So it's not like they're just sitting around waiting on government benefits. Some are, but they're also white and black doing that. Right. But the only image we see and the only story that's being told, including the Democrats have told this story, right? Clinton came in talking about he's going to reform the welfare system to get all the welfare moms off the system, right? Again, stepping in and vilifying people who just need a leg up in our society. So I just say this, now I'm done. As Christians, I think that too many of us are being informed by our politics and not informing politics. And that's an area where I think as Christians, when it comes to helping people, I never saw a conditional help in the Bible. I never saw Jesus condition it. Jesus said if they need it and you have it, give it, right? When I look in 1 John says, if you have the world's wealth and you fail to help people, the love of God isn't in you. It's unequivocally clear. So I think that as Christians, that to me, that takes it even further, that we should be trying to find a way to help people.
Okay, so the last point, then we're going to go ahead and close. But because we haven't even got into the
good stuff yet.
Yeah, the real good stuff, the hot stuff. So, but you make a point there. You said, so Jesus kind of gives us the sense of if we have it, to give it. But that's a far cry different than saying you're going to set up a system and take it and give to those who won't do. In other words, we're talking about socialism. We're talking about socialism. Because watch this, Jesus is not a socialist. I mean, come on. I mean, wow. Think about it. Doesn't the Bible say if a man doesn't work, then a man doesn't eat? You think about the parable of the talents. How one had 5, one had 2, one had 1. Now he gave them the talent to go out and do something with.
Yeah.
Then when he came back to check on what he had invested in the 3, at least the one with 5 flipped it. Okay, made 10. One, the one with 2 flipped it, 4. But the one who had 1, you had one job. You had one job with your one talent, and you did nothing with it but buried it. So now, but you understand? I'm preaching to the choir.
No, you're not. You're not. I just want to jump in. You're not. No. So to suggest that Jesus didn't believe in the concept of socialism, I think ignores so much of the Bible, right? So socialism is the concept of shared property, that you share in property so that you can benefit everyone with the shared property. That's socialism. So,
but socialism. Socialism is when you set up a system. Socialism is when you set up a system so then that it's different if I'm sharing, right. But when you take to disperse, that's not sharing. And that's what socialism is.
Let's talk about it. So the church, right? The church is built on the concept of socialism. When you tithe into a pot. Everyone's tithing into that pot for the benefit of everyone. Every charity is built on the same concept of socialism. So, in fact, socialism so permeates our society that it's hard for us to say we're not socialists. When you retire, you're retiring hoping that other people, and in fact, they're taking the money from them. They're taking the money from other people to pay for you to go vacation, right? When you want to get a mortgage, what they do is they take money from other people in the bank that they've deposited. They give it to you to go buy a house so that you can then enjoy the American dream, right? The concept, and then we can just take it biblical. The early church, when there was a famine in the land, what did the early church do? They went and got a bunch of stuff.
They gave, right? But
let's take it even further. Let's look at where they said
did they give of their heart? Did they voluntarily give, or was
it talking about the famine? The famine, they just went out and got a bunch of stuff to make sure they could feed people. But we can go back to the time where the disciples were trying to build the early church. And it said that everybody gave and they had all things in common. So again, if we're talking about Christians, it shouldn't even be about a taking. We should have a spirit of giving so that it doesn't have to be taken from us. Jumping to your story about the parables, what's interesting about them is that they were given. Right? I think this American concept that we've earned things and then we get to go multiply what we've earned is a false narrative. The story of the parables was they were given something from God. They didn't earn it. They were given something from God, and then they had to go do some work with it. Right? So the idea that we're not called as Christians to find every opportunity to find a way to help those that are less fortunate than us, even if it means we're going to acquiesce to a taking, which we do anyway. Our taxes are taken from us, right? The idea that somehow, especially when it comes to healthcare, that when we go work a job, we opt into an insurance system where they're taking money out of our check. The idea that Jesus doesn't support us being socialized in our giving and socialized to help other people, I don't see that anywhere in the Bible. Anywhere. And let's say this, socialism isn't asking for people not to work, right? It just says, let's help people who are in a less fortunate situation.
Okay. So on that note, because my program director is shutting us down, and I really would love to go a little further than this, but we are out of time. So I told you we weren't going to get all this done. This week.
This might need to be a 5-part.
And we just may have to in the next segment and stretch this thing out. But listen, Jason, my friend, my brother, family, I want to thank you for sharing your time with me and with us.
Thanks for having me.
And we're going to continue this discussion next week. And so for our viewing audience, you didn't see the last of Jason, and he's probably gonna really come for me. He's being reserved, y'all. He's being very reserved. He's being very reserved. He's coming for me next episode. I know he is. So I'm gonna have to load up myself, bro. Hey, but look, I love you.
Love you too, man.
And listen. So listen, for our viewing audience, I want to thank you for being here with us. Remember, this is Straight Truth Radio podcast, the place where the truth endures forever.
Amen.
You can check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Periscope, and also YouTube now. And again, you can catch the audio format on Anchor, Podbean, Apple Podcasts, and SoundCloud. So remember, until we meet again, remember, hold on to him who is able to keep us from failing and falling. Remember, we are not sinless, but we sin less because of him who became sin for us. So until next time, stay strong, stay true. God bless you. We'll see you next week.
Bless, brother.